Welcome back, Pokemon trainers. It might be the lunch break for some of our players, but we've got two waiting in the wings for another amazing round 3 matchup, if the last one is anything to go by.
Yes, the last one was very much hype because did you see Fevzi Özkan and his incredible team just going absolute to town on that Dondozo?
I mean, I never thought Torkoal versus Dondozo would, A, necessarily happen, because I would have normally benched my Torkoal, but then not only did it happen, but then Torkoal won. I think that was just amazing, and it was really nice to get some insight from Fevzi about how, yes, you're looking at tight matchups, it may not be the most advantageous thing, but build them bulky and they will get you the win.
Exactly, and he did that consistently in a 2-0 as well, so he's going to have a nice lunch break too.
Yes, exactly. You know, get a little bit of energy on board to face the rest of the day, because there's a lot of Swiss rounds in this day 1, and then obviously if you make it through to day 2, it's another bunch of Swiss rounds before you get to that elusive top cut that all of our trainers are working towards.
Yeah, and maybe that's why we're seeing a lot of hyper offense at the moment, and a lot of Paradox Pokemon too. But we are now getting into our second round 3 match, round 3B, so these trainers have been waiting patiently for us after Fevzi's match, and it's going to be Simone Sanvito and Álex Soto.
Now, both these players are well established in kind of top placements. But the one thing I want to talk about first of all, before we dive into the actual players, is you just mentioned Pokemon in terms of Paradox Pokemon. And yet, Álex Soto was well known for getting second place at was it Liverpool Regionals? Yes, Liverpool Regionals, with obviously a Series 1 team, because that's what we were using back then. And it looks like it might be a very, very similar team.
Yes, I think so. So you'll get to see it on your screens very shortly. But yeah, if anyone is familiar with what he was using, you might be thinking you've got a bit of deja vu.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the interesting thing. You know, yourself as a player as well, going from Series 1 into Series 2, particularly if you've had success in Series 1, would you want to change up your team too drastically, or would you want to adapt a core and a strategy that you know well and maybe throw in a few Paradox Pokemon or change things up a little bit, or would you want to change things completely? What would you do?
Well, exactly. Initially, I think you can think, oh, let's look at the Paradox Pokemon. How can I best use these? And then you start with a Fluttermane, for instance, or you start with an Iron Moth or something, and then build around it. But yeah, another way you can do it, which is what Álex Soto has probably done, take in an old team and go, right, can any of these components in here, can any Paradox Pokemon now do a job better than what I've got already, or any of the new tools that we've got? Álex has obviously kind of looked at the roster and gone, no.
Yeah, in contrast to, I'm sure, lots of players. Álex, we've got the headphones on as well, so we can start talking a little bit more about the teams. It is still open team sheet, but it's always good to keep it while they're still focused. But Álex Soto in Liverpool ran Kingambit, Torkoal, Indeedee, Hatterene, Armarouge, and Annihilape. A very, very lovely Trick Room team, and it's nice to see Torkoal in its natural habitat of Trick Room. And guess what? He's bringing the same 6 this time. No Paradox Pokemon. A few changes here or there in terms of from what his team sheet looked like in Liverpool to now. But generally speaking, it's the same.
Exactly. And when you look at the Paradox Pokemon, you can kind of see why, right? Because none of them are particularly really slow, or like apart from maybe Brute Bonnet or Iron Hands, but they very much make a more of a supportive role. So, and often, even with Brute Bonnet, people are often kind of going more towards a Moongus still. You still have that bulk, and you've still got arguably a better, slight defensive typing.
That's the thing, in the Battle of the Mushrooms, Amoonguss is still running supreme, because both Pokemon do get, you know, Rage Powder and Spore, but like you say, when you kind of look at the way that they're built in terms of defensiveness and speed as well, Amoonguss is incredibly slow. It's just one of the best Trick Room counters out there. Because it can do similar things to Brute Bonnet, if you wanted to go for that Rage Powder Spore support kind of Pokemon on your team, you're still going to pick Amoonguss. Yes, Brute Bonnet can do some other things as well, and its typing is a really nice adjustment, having that kind of dark and grass typing. But if you want to run it with that supportive role, you will just use Amoonguss instead.
But on Álex Soto's team, as we've talked a lot about, it is that Trick Room, but it doesn't actually have either of those options. So he's obviously just going straight for that offense. But on the other side, Simone and his team, it's a little bit more of what we've been seeing in the last couple of rounds or so. He's got a Palafin, Fluttermane, Roaring Moon, Arcanine. There is the Amoonguss, and Iron Hands as well. So a little bit more of what we'd normally be seeing in the previous ones.
Yes, exactly. On Simone Sanvito's team, you can see, again, some amazing accomplishments. I remember that European International Championship win against Alex Gomez, actually, in 2018. It was a fantastic victory there for Simone. And, you know, again, following in that year, got top 16 at Worlds as well, so a very well-accomplished player. Of course, Alex, we've mentioned, was the runner-up at the most recent Liverpool Regional Championships. But actually, as a little throwback, we are in Bochum right now. And back in 2020, we were in the same venue, same location, and he was also the runner-up there. So I feel like, 3 years later, Álex is going to want to try and go one step further and get that champion title.
Yeah, I wouldn't be complaining if I was like multiple times runner-up, but obviously there's going to be something in the back of Alex's mind going, oh, what if I just won that extra game? That would have been pretty nice.
Yeah, exactly. Just one. When you're so close to victory, particularly twice there, we've seen 2 runner-up spots in a regional. You might be thinking, hey, 2023, it's going to be my year. I'm going to really try and make sure that I get that win. But Simone is definitely a very hard trainer to battle up against. You can take a closer look at Simone's team here as well. Once again, there's a Palafin, but there's no Pelipper. I think he got left in Oceania, to be honest.
Yeah, I think people are just banking, on Palafin just being good. And then now we've seen, like, on multiple occasions now on stream, everyone's just using Torkoll, so it's just completely nullified the use of these Palafin because none of them are running Pelipper with it either. So it's just they're able to bring it and boost up all of these past Pokemon that have the photosynthesis that can be activated by the sun, unlike the future ones with the Quark Drive. And
that's something that, Simone has to watch out for. He's running Fluttermane and Roaring Moon, 2 Pokemon that will have their photosynthesis activated by the sun of the Torkoll on Alex's side. You can see the Roaring Moon, however, is running that booster energy, so it will always get its ability activated regardless of the weather. But that's something you as a Fluttermane, you're going to love this because you're going to be like, I've got choice specs and I'm going to get the boost as well on my ability. It could be a really difficult situation for Álex if he enables that to happen for Simone. And looking back to Series 1, where Trick Room was arguably, or Hard Trick Room rather, was a lot more common, one of the big things that you had to kind of contend with was Torkoll. Yes. And in the Trick Room matchup. But as the Torkoll player on the Hard Trick Room, you had to contend with Amoonguss. That was usually enough, especially with a terrestrialization into water, to be able to deal with Torkoll. Now we've had a bit of a veering away from that now into Amoonguss being more dark type. It takes on the psychic types better because indeed Armarouge is quite common, and it means it can't be pranked or taunted. And now, because Torkoll's kind of fallen off a bit, but now Torkoll's in a position where it can actually hit this Amoonguss really hard, even if it terrestrializes. Yes, and Amoonguss is going to have a difficult time. As you can see, we've got triple Trick Room on here, indeed Armarouge and the Hatterene as well. And the key thing here is, Spore is the key thing that Amoonguss wants to do. It can't go for that into Hatterene because Magic Bounce will just bounce it right back. You cannot put that Pokemon to sleep. Indeedee is rocking that Grass Terror as well, so it has the utility to be able to try and work around a potential Spore or Rage Powder redirection. And that's where really this Terra typing has allowed a lot of flexibility into team building. It has, and something that Álex Soto actually changed from his Series 1 Liverpool team was one of the Terra types, and that was on his Annihilate, which I believe was a Ghost Terra before, possibly, and now is Grass. So he's actually even more prepared for Amoonguss now, and especially with this Amoonguss not even being that terrestrialization in water, he's probably looking fairly good, and it's maybe not something that Simone has maybe planned in here. There's no imprisoned Trick Room or anything, so I'd be curious to see how he uses his more bulky Pokemon to kind of outstall Alex's Trick Room. Yeah, that's a good point. Normally, when you don't necessarily have the best Trick Room matchup, you might have a way to kind of stop the Trick Room, a couple of taunts thrown in here or there, possibly, like you say, imprison, or you would run a Trick Room of your own just to try and reverse it. The key Pokemon here, I think, is going to have to be that Amoonguss because, you have Iron Hands that could go for something like a Fake Out, but then we have the Indeedee that can set up that Psychic terrain with Psychic Surge, and that's going to not allow those priority moves to come into effect. And I think that is why when you talk about Trick Room teams, particularly in Series 2, Armarouge and Indeedee has been so dominant in terms of getting that set up. It has, and what's also interesting is the particularly special defensive Pokemon like a really bulky Assault Vest Iron Hands can... Oh, unfortunately, we've got a communication error, so they're probably going to have to just quickly go back into I blame Amoonguss. It's just too strong. or more of our Pikachus, or maybe the Iron Hand's getting the touch on the electrical wiring this time. But, yeah, so Amoonguss is obviously very slow, and it's able to operate in the Trick Room a little bit better. Depends on how much bulk it is able to take on this charcoal-boosted eruptions from Torkoll. And looking at the team on Alex's side, he's also got like a helping hand to also boost that further. So that might be something Amoonguss cannot survive. So I think the training of each of these players in their Pokemon, that is something that neither of them could see of each other, is going to be really key. Yes, and I want to talk a little bit about the Hatterene and Indeedee lead that we did see come out from Álex, just, if that game had kind of carried on, because both those Pokemon are running Trick Room. Indeedee, getting Trick Room is a new thing that we've had in Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet, and the fact that you now have this utility, if you're Simone, to be like playing the guessing game, where's Trick Room coming from? Which one is going to go for it? And in the same vein, you know, on Alex's side, you have that support with Indeedee. Yes, it could go for the Trick Room. You could maybe try and, you know, protect Hatterene in some way. You know, it could try and go for some damage. Doesn't mind if it goes down. If Trick Room goes up, you could bring in that Torkoal you talked about from the back. Or alternatively, you could go for that Follow Me. And then even if you are up against a Pokemon like Fluttermane that can do some big damage with a Shadow Ball to that opposing Hatterene, you'll support it because Indeedee with that normal typing is not going to be affected at all by that redirected Shadow Ball.
And Hatterene is something, a Pokemon that we've really seen nothing of, really, over the last, even Series 1, really. People have been more geared towards other Trick Room users, maybe like a Mimikyu, for instance, or the Armarouge itself. But here, it's a really nice option because it offers a lot of fairy offensive power. You can combination with the Psychic, which is obviously really good for Dark types, and especially into now Iron Hand, too, which is such a really common Pokemon. So if you have a constant damage output versus that, as well as threatening the Trick Room, even if they go on the defensive, it's a really cool, interesting piece that you can use.
Well, it's a double whammy here, and, you know, third time will hopefully be the charm. But we talked a little bit about Alex's lead there, but let's talk about how Simone was leading into that matchup. We saw the Amoonguss and the Roaring Moon. Now, Roaring Moon's been a Pokemon that we were talking about when we were broadcasting together earlier. That jaw lock, really pitting Pokemon in, has been a really nice addition to Roaring Moon. But the key thing, I think, is that Dragon Dance to allow it a little bit more flexibility on the offensive side, too.
I agree. And it's really easy for Roaring Moon to pile on lots of offensive pressure that someone's going to want to protect versus it or to switch out. And so, yeah, if you have that Dragon Dance, then you're able to go straight for that and really punish defensive play. And then you're even more threatening for the following turn. And especially with Jaw Lock going into a Trick Room matchup, if you want to reposition, get something in that's more offensive to make the most of your Trick Room, Jaw Lock is going to prevent that.
Exactly, and I think the Dragon Dance is nice because you might kind of think, well, you're against a Trick Room team, you don't want to be speedy, but then, again, Alex's team is a very hard Trick Room team. You're not going to be, you know, underspeeding in Trick Room anyway, so you might as well get the speed boost because critically, obviously, you get the attack boost as well with Dragon Dance, and then as soon as Trick Room is over, you have even more of an advantage speed-wise, just in case something comes out that would be a little bit more difficult to deal with, like the Annihilate, for example.
Yeah, and interestingly, both these players now, because we have had a couple of communication errors, they've got a lot of now time to kind of think about this lead.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of options that they can kind of think about. And on the surface, you've got, yeah, Roaring Moon and Amoonguss, and the speed interactions there, but you've also got the mindset of, is there any Terastallization going to happen this turn? Yeah. So for Amoonguss, especially being that Dark type, it's going to be able to take the Psychic move so much better, but then suddenly a Dazzling Gleam, pretty hard.
I like the Dark type on Amoonguss because it is really like throwing shade towards Brute Bonnet, being like, I'm here and you're not, and guess what, you have the Dark typing, but I do too. And it's just kind of nice to see Amoonguss still being played so strongly, and I like actually kind of the boldness that Simone's let out with that Amoonguss, because you know that you're going into a hard Trick Room team, and on Alex's side, you're going to be worried that the Amoonguss is going to be there, and, you know, is it in the back? You don't even have to play those mind games. It's sitting front and center, almost like Simone is kind of saying, I've got it, I dare you to click Trick Room, I dare you.
Exactly, and what can also happen is if you've got the mind game of Psychic versus Dazzling Gleam, right? Assuming you say you've got Trick Room up or even turn 1, if you go for Dazzling Gleam, you hit super effective into the Roaring Moon and not so much into Amoonguss. But you have the opportunity to wait on Terastallization to hit 2 targets super effectively with Dazzling Gleam, 2 targets not very effective with Dazzling Gleam, or you can hit super effectively with Psychic or not do nothing, or hits fairly good damage into Roaring Moon with Psychic if it Terastallizes into Flying, or nothing. So even though you've got great coverage, there's still so like variability.
I mean, honestly, my brain has just gone from all of that, because honestly, that's one of the situations our players have to deal with. They have to look at all those eventualities, and it's not just playing the Pokemon on the team sheet, it's also playing the player. So you kind of have to think, right, out of all these combinations that my opponent could go for, which one do I think they are going to pick? And sometimes that's where you have to look at players' play style. Some players like to play really defensively, and they'll do a lot of preserving, board position switching, and then there'll also be the players who will take those risks. And I think that, you know, the more you get to know not only the meta game, but the player pool that is currently doing well, particularly if you're, you know, going to be up against these top players, that can sometimes enable you to get the edge in a match if you're also able to read how your opponent is going to play rather than just the options. It's a whole load of combinations you have to think about.
It really is. So I imagine, like, with Simone's lead, we've almost definitely got like an Arcanine in the back. That's going to be my kind of bet for today, because it's got the ability to switch in Intimidate and nerf some of the physical attackers, mainly Annihilate here, or Kingambit, I suppose, but they've both got Defiant, I've just realised. So there's actually not a lot in the Intimidate's going to do here, to be honest, apart from using its own fire type to take Torkoal's hits pretty well. And normally we've got some Snarl on the Arcanine too. Here we don't. And instead we've got Extreme Speed, which isn't great into Psychic terrain. So I could see the benefit of it, because you can get off maybe some will-o-wisp, but then you want to position it right so you're not switching in on those physical attackers. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one here, and I think it's going to depend on what these people have in the back.
I think it definitely sounds like a tall order for Simone in that situation. And, you know, at the end of the day, you have to prep for Trick Room. It's something that's always been a part of every metagame. But the way that Álex is running it, particularly with that triple Trick Room variation and having a nice flexibility, you know, you've got those really heavy special attackers. You've got Hadarine on there, and obviously the Torkoal and Armor Rouge. But then you also have this nice Ulla mode with the King Gambit and the Annihilate. And obviously Annihilate's been a Pokemon we've seen pretty much from day one in Series 1. I remember Marcus Statter winning the Stuttgart side event with this Mouse Hold and Annihilate combination, and it also did relatively well in Oceania. But on this team, you know, we don't have that Mouse Hold support. Annihilate's just kind of out here running that Choice Scarf, almost like the original variation of that Annihilate. And I think that makes it a really dangerous Pokemon to contend with, because particularly if Trick Room runs out, or maybe you don't want to set Trick Room up right away, it allows Álex the flexibility to switch the speed control.
I agree completely, and it gives you the opportunity to just get a huge knockout on something that is the main threat. Unfortunately, Mungus' HP is pretty high, so it's usually able to live these final gambits, and especially with Iron Hands. Anyone who remembers Hariyama and its HP stat, it's the same, so it's, like, it's just huge. It's pretty high, so I can maybe see that maybe coming into like a game 2 as an alternative way to kind of shake things up and get up a Trick Room a slightly different way. But Indeedee Hatterene still gives Álex a lot of different options.
I mean, that's the thing. You could potentially have like Annihilate and something like the Hadarine, and then Annihilate could take out the Pokemon that isn't the Amoonguss, and allow Amoonguss to try and go for a Spore, but, you know, like the Magic Bounce will bounce it back. But then again, that's where you have the issue of something like a Rage Powder, and you can redirect it in. Like you've said, it's going to be able to survive a final Gambit. It's a very, very bulky Pokemon, and then suddenly you're in this difficult situation where your Pokemon are very vulnerable. That Hadarine may not be able to get Trick Room up. But I wouldn't be surprised to see it potentially as something in the back, not so much for final Gambit, but it has got a lot of great moves in the form of Close Combat, Shadow Claw as well, so it can then still deal a heavy punch, particularly to something like that Flutter Mane. If you can get it with the Shadow Claw, that's going to hurt.
Really is. And something I want to comment on is some of the specifics of Alex's team here. And they are the same as what he was using in Series 1. But in their relevance to Series 2, it's interesting that he's kept them on as well. So something like the King Gambit here, which doesn't have Protect, which is pretty common amongst a lot of his Pokemon because he's got Psychic Terrain. You can see it's really geared to Trick Room, make the most of those turns. I'm in control. I'm got the momentum here. And he's even got Swords Dance in case there was any sort of potential like protects or switches out. So that there's no chance for the opponent in the Trick Room to be feeling safe.
That's the thing. I kind of like the bold play of, you know, I'm always going to be in control in this match, because ultimately if you're Álex, you are forcing your opponent to have to deal with Trick Room. That's ultimately what they can't necessarily execute their own game plan because they have to adapt to yours. And I really like the bold play Álex has gone for by bringing over this Series 1 team, because I think it's sometimes an error that players will get into where, you know, there's hot new Pokemon out and you want to be able to use them and you want to see what's doing well, but you almost forget about what has already done well, what's already accomplished. And remember, this is a Series 1 runner-up team as well from the last European Regional, so it's something that players will definitely be aware of. So it's just whether, you know, your adaptations still can kind of accommodate in case you face it.
And this Amoonguss lead of Simone's here, it has the option of Pollen Puff as well.
Yes,
so which
Pollen Puff.
we've seen a huge amount of. It enables a decent amount of damage into the very common dark types that are going on at the moment. Roaring Moon is a big one. But also you can heal your partner Pokemon. So you can dish out a lot of damage, say from this Roaring Moon here with the acrobatics, and then Pollen Puff it up to kind of keep it fresh. I'm assuming you've probably Terrasalized in the flying type to take a fairy move, because this Indeedee also has Dazzling Gleam on top of the Hatterene.
I think I'm not recovered from Pollen Puff. I think Okoing and Meowscarada. I know it is 4 times super effective, but I just never thought that Amoonguss could get Okos, but that's now a thing. What is also a thing is our game. Third time has indeed been the charm. Álex Soto on your right-hand side versus Simone Sanvito on your left.
And so we're looking at the different options that we kind of already talked about. The Roaring Moon here is going to be safer to Terrasalize into the flying type here, because then there's no kind of super effective options. Otherwise, it's going to be very much on the defensive here. However, obviously, Alex's priority is probably to try and get up the Trick Room here, so you could imagine Simone probably doesn't feel like he needs to Terrasalize right now, because then it means Álex is not getting up the Trick Room. And that affords him the ability to potentially get off a Spore into the Indeedee, or a Pollen Puff somewhere to kind of chip something down a bit more so you can bring something in like that Flutter Mane and really threaten more damage. But actually we're going to see a switch up from this Indeedee turn 1.
Yeah, indeed, he also had its Psychic Seed activated, so it will lose the boost it's got from that, and sacrificing it for the face of King Gambit. Dragon Dance is going to come out from this Roaring Moon, getting its attack and speed boosted up, maybe just kind of accepting that Trick Room is going to go up. Amoonguss is going to go for the Spore, and it was going into that King Gambit that's rocking the safety goggles, so it doesn't have to worry about that. The Hatterene is, of course, going to set up that Trick Room, so now the speeds are reversed. The slower Pokemon will be able to go first.
I love the play on Álex. Like, we've just talked about kind of momentum and making sure he's making the most of his Trick Room turns. That's exactly what you want, because indeed he's such a passive Pokemon. It's great for the support to do what you want your other Pokemon to do, but after that, it's really not doing a whole lot. And this is the perfect opportunity to kind of really put the foot down on that accelerator and start dishing out so much damage here, because King Gambit offers you so much offense on the physical side as well, which Amoonguss is not so known for.
Yeah, so now you've got that perfect combination of physical offense and special attack offense with the Hatterene and the King Gambit. And I think you make a great observation, because indeed he's the kind of Pokemon that can help you set up Trick Room, but then can't necessarily do too much in it. It can throw a helping hand here or there, but it's really good to be able to see this ball position, a maneuverability that Álex has got into. But we're going to see a terrestrialization straight off the bat as well. It's actually going to come down onto that Roaring Moon, going to go into Flying Terror. I think this is very wise when you are in the face of a Fairy-type Pokemon like the Hatterene, because you will be dealing full-time super effective if that Terror had not been activated. Amoonguss just going to go for a Protect, however, doesn't want to go on the offensive. At the end of the day, it cannot go for Sport into either of Alex's Pokemon, as Hatterene does indeed go for that Dazzling Gleam. So a really nice Terror here from Simone, not going to be dealing too much damage. Does about a third, and you can see Amoonguss takes that really well. Oh, Amoonguss, it's protected. It takes it so well because it doesn't take any damage. Again, love this play. Álex playing so bold and brave with this King Gambit. It's on the field. It now goes for the Swords Dance.
Yeah, a really interesting Protect from the Amoonguss there, because it's not really a threat to Álex at the moment. There was nothing really it was going to do. It can't Spore either slot. Pollen Puff doesn't do much damage. And if it was going to go heal the Roaring Moon, it could only do it after Hatterene's come done a bit of a hit, so it wasn't really the threat there. I feel like there was a missed opportunity for maybe possibly a switch. However, this Roaring Moon now is looking really scary at the moment, and it was a good play to not go for the Protect there, which I think Álex was maybe thinking might happen. Because I think with a Kowtow Cleave plus that Dazzling Gleam, that's probably would have been enough for the, into the Roaring Moon, depending on its bulk. So Simone's kind of got away with something at the moment, but let's see how he can deal with the remaining Trick Room turns. And
we've got the Torkoal, who seems to be the superstar of the Bochum Regional Championship so far, in a really great position. It can obviously apply a lot of pressure to that opposing Amoonguss with something like a Flame Tower, but you also have to contend with the fact that it's running Clear Smog, and that's something that could go into that Roaring Moon and reduce the Dragon Dance boost, you know, lowering its attack right back down to neutral. But instead, it's just going to go for the Eruption. Slowest thing on the field. Will be able to deal a huge chunk of damage thanks to the fact that its HP bar is currently full, so it will be maximizing its potential and gets the solid one-hit KO against that Amoonguss.
Amoonguss often use resist berries or mental herbs and stuff like that, but it's just the citrus berry here just to maximize some bulk, so there's no kind of specific matchup that Simone's kind of made his Amoonguss for. So, and it's really kind of put him in a disadvantage at this point, because if you want your one slow Pokemon to be kind of good into the Trick Room, but when you've got facing down a Torkoal, it's not a lot it can do here. And there's Arcanine in the back, which has now come in and it's activated the Defiance of this King Gambit, so it's now at +3 attack. It's going to be able to take the Torkoal's hit a little bit better, but this King Gambit is probably still slower, and its Psychic Terrain is still up, so there's no priority moves that can go on. Roaring Moon's just left itself open now thanks to Zero Protects, so Álex is still very much in got the momentum here, and let's see if Simone can respond.
Yeah, I mean, the one issue with the Roaring Moon is having that flying typing now. It can still be hit by the Sucker Punch coming out from the King Gambit, but you're right, it cannot go down into that Arcanine, but considering the Roaring Moon's protected, it's leaving itself a little bit vulnerable. Torkoal just adding more fuel to the fire here, and is going to be going for a Terrafire. This Eruption with the sun in the sky, holding a Charcoal, is going to deal a huge chunk of damage, even to the Arcanine. Look at that, 2/3 of damage gone.
Yeah, Torkoal is really a threat to be considered for everyone's team. So if anyone's forgotten about it, this weekend, you need to be rethinking things. Kowtow Cleave comes out from King Gambit just to finish things off as well. So a huge double KO for Álex at the end of this turn.
Yeah, wake up world. Torkoal is back. Move over, Pelipper. Sun is here to stay. We could definitely do with some in Germany at the moment, so it's great to see it inside this arena. Fluttermane is going to be the last Pokemon coming out for Simone, and I just think it's too much of a steep hill for it to climb. It, you know, naturally is quite good in its special defense, but that Torkoal is very, very strong. Fluttermane is very, very fast, so it's not going to really have a way to deal with it. So Torkoal able to go for Eruption one more time in this game one.
Yeah, Eruption finally, and yeah, that is going to be a one-hit KO. Fluttermane's special defense isn't bad, but yeah, Terrafire, Sun, Charcoal, Eruption, full health. it's all just going to stack up. So yeah, a convincing game one to Álex Soto.
Yeah, we might have had to wait, 3 times to get into this game one, but Álex certainly made up for lost time, just absolutely taking game one by storm. I think if you're Simone, you're now in a really difficult position going into game two because, Amoonguss just got taken down so easily by that Torkoal, and unfortunately, like you said, it kind of got pinned down into this situation where it couldn't go for Spore due to the 2 Pokemon on the field. Pollen Puff really wasn't doing anything, and Rage Powder wasn't going to necessarily enable you support, considering the spread move capability that Álex has, Dazzling Gleam on Hatterene, and obviously Eruption on the Torkoal. So going into this game two, do you think there's anything else Simone could lead to give him a better advantage?
Yeah, I think there is. So you've got the Iron Hands as an option, obviously, with the Terra Grass. So as soon as you've terrored into the grass and the Torkoal's not there yet, it's quite a bulky option to go against these Pokemon. And with Volt Switch, it allows you to kind of pivot your Pokemon a little bit more safely as well. So that could be a switch up that you could potentially make. Doesn't offer a lot of offense apart from into the King Gambit. You do have the Palafin, obviously, which is a little bit more bulky, can take the Torkoal hits, but you're not going to do a whole lot back if the Torkoal's there too. So if anything, Simone probably needs to use the same Pokemon he's got overall, but in a slightly different way. And I think he was just caught off guard by Alex's turn one of switching in that King Gambit and like that huge reversal of momentum, which I don't think Álex is going to be able to get away with next turn. And
you were right. You said, I am confident that Arcanine's going to be in the back there for Simone, and you were correct. Just unfortunately, it came out in the face of that King Gambit, and then King Gambit just applies so much pressure. Having moves like Calton Cleave, and I believe it's at +3 attack, that would have been able to deal a huge chunk of damage. And even, like you said, if anything, went to untoward, maybe you take a Will-O-Wisp from the Arcanine, you always have that Swords Dance as well.
And from Alex's side, I think we're probably going to see the same lead, to be honest, because it offered him so many different options. Like, yes, we saw him switch out to the King Gambit and, like, basically just not use his Indeedee. So, like, even if he brings it again this time, he still has the option of going for that Follow Me, more safely set things up, because things really went his way that time, especially seeing the terrestrialization of the Roaring Moon made things just so much easier in terms of where he needed to target.
Yep, I completely agree. And going into this game too as well, I feel like there is no need for Álex to change up the strategy. But there we have it. Hatterene is still here, so 50% we were right. But that Annihilate wants to get in on the action as well. And it's going to be facing down against the Arcanine and the Fluttermane. And it's happy to see an Arcanine. It gets that Defiant boost straight off the bat here in game two.
Yeah, you're right, Lou, to kind of bring attention to that Annihilate, because here it is this time, and it's not facing down any Pokemon that can have a higher HP stat than Annihilate, which is really key, because it basically is able to threaten the final Gambit into either of these 2 Pokemon and threaten with an immediate knockout. So it's going to be pretty scary for either of these Pokemon, really. However, we do know that the Fluttermane has that booster energy. It doesn't have the booster energy, but when it's activated, it does boost its speed. So, but there's no kind of obvious way for Sun to get up right this turn. But yeah, let's see what happens here, because like it's turn one versus Trick Room is usually pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, speaking of wild things, the Amoonguss has joined the action here, and we know how ferocious it can be in terms of its support. However, let's see a little terrestrialization here. It's actually going to be onto that Fluttermane, and it is going to be the Steel type, so you're right. Final Gambit can go down into either of Simone's Pokemon to try and pick up a KO. Not so much the Amoonguss, though. It has now jumped into the action. You've already talked about how bulky it can be. So I wonder if Álex maybe has gone that little bit braver to see where it's going to be targeting down. That said, I would have quite liked to see the Shadow Claw come out. I think it's a really safe bet, and it means that you're not going to lose your Annihilate at this point. Speaking of terrestrialization, however, it's going to be a Fire Hatterene. Yeah, I like the Fire Hatterene, because obviously you can take the Ghost types a little bit better, but it's, no Final Gambit here, so it's just the U-turn. Álex is basically banking of being able to live any of the attacks coming out from Simone's end here, which I would imagine it probably is able to here. Hatterene's bulk is usually pretty good, but Fluttermane is very strong, and it's got the choice specs, I believe, as well. So, but I believe there is going to be a live here, and of course Spore doesn't affect either. So Trick Room, I think we know, is going to go up here as Torkoal comes in instead.
I mean, this is a situation that Fluttermane might ideally be enjoying. It's going to have the Protosynthesis activated, and it's going to be at speed, not at special attack here. So it's going to be, you know, really struggling in a Trick Room environment. Shadow Ball with that Choice Specs is going to connect on Hatterene, but thanks to the Fire Terror, it's going to be able to survive that and safely get the Trick Room up. I really do like this adjustment with the Fire Terror. It not only allows you to drop your weaknesses to that Shadow Ball, but also just in the face of potentially, just generally speaking in team building, in the face of any Steel-type moves, it does allow Hatterene that breathing room as well.
And unfortunately for Simone, he's kind of already used up his Terastallization. And this is great news for Álex, because that means there's no threat of a Dark-type Amoonguss coming out, which could potentially live the eruptions of this Torkoal. So now Amoonguss is now just sitting there and can't really do a whole lot to be able to live it at the moment. And Fluttermane's Terastallization was arguably wasted, because it got into a defensive Steel type to potentially take on a Shadow Claw, which never ended up appearing. So instead we have the defensive switch into Arcaline, which probably can take these hits a little bit better. Yeah,
this time it gets in safely, throws an Intimidate down, but to no avail. There's no Defiant there, and they are both special attackers here. We're going to see the Protect once again from the Amoonguss, knowing that this eruption is coming. We're not going to see the Terror on Torkoal this time, but it is still rocking that Charcoal. The sun is in the sky, so it's going to boost up these Fire-type moves, and does nearly 50% to the Arcanine. Hatterene's able to follow up with the Psychic, doesn't go into the Protect, and gets the knockout on the Arcanine. So it was short-lived, Sweet Doggo, but you have now left the field.
Yeah, and that was a really safe play for Álex to go for. There's no reason to do another target into the Amoonguss slot. You might as well target into the other one, because Eruption is definitely knocking out this Amoonguss from full health still. So Álex is really much in the driver's seat again with this Trick Room, using that Torkoal to a really good effect.
And now you've got the Roaring Moon on the field, and Hatterene is just very, very happy to see it. It can go for something like that Dazzling Gleam, 4 times super effective. Sanvi knows what's happening here. The writing's on the wall, so Simone will be locking in the forfeit, meaning Álex Soto and that amazing hard Trick Room team from Series 1 gets the 2-0 victory.
Yeah, huge congrats to Álex Soto. Like, it was just expertly piloted, and arguably, like, hard Trick Room is something that you can kind of flowchart in a way, right? So, like, you go, right, I need to get up Trick Room. Which one do I pick? Which one matches better up? How can I support that Trick Room? Do I pick Annihilate or Indeedee? And then what do I need to do the damage in the back? So you could argue there's a little bit more simplicity to kind of how you pilot it, but to actually play it at this sort of level versus the players that are completely aware of that is really something else, to kind of get into your opponent's head about how you think that they're going to defensively get around your own Trick Room, and you can see how Álex really excelled at doing that.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's what they say, right? And that's exactly what Álex has brought from Series 1 into Series 2. And I think, commiserations to Simone here. That was such a difficult matchup. And when we actually kind of tore it apart a little bit there, waiting for the game to start, there really was a difficult situation. There was no easy way to get out of that. So kind of, I suppose my advice to Simone is it can't get any worse matchup-wise, I would like to say. I hope I haven't commentators cursed that into existence. But generally speaking, I just don't see a way that he could work around that Trick Room mode.
Yeah, I think he would have made have really some hard calls there. And there was potential for whatever Álex did. There was an answer during those turns that he could have done. For instance, like not Terastallize the Fluttermane in that game too, or maybe spored the incoming Torkoal slot, for instance, or something. But it's just really hard to make that call, right? Like there's so much that need to go right for that to happen. So it's always tempting to make the middle ground play as to, like, right, if this goes wrong, I don't lose too much, or I can take the hit if I switch in this. But then with a matchup kind of you being a step behind, you really need to be making those harder calls.
Yeah, and the issue is that you've got the Fluttermane with that Steel Terror, and I think that's a risk not only in the face of a Torkoal, but also that Hatterene was running Mystical Fire. And Mystical Fire, obviously a Fire-type move, it's in the name, but also when Torkoal is setting up the sun, that's going to be boosting that move even more, giving it a 50% boost to its offensive pressure, and I think that makes things very, very difficult then for Hatterene, the Fluttermane to play around, because it's always going to be vulnerable.
I'd be also curious as to how Álex Soto's team kind of goes into a Dondozo matchup, right?
Oh, true.
There's been a lot of that here, so seeing how he deals with that is probably definitely going to be something that we'll eventually see if depending on how far he gets. So, and that's probably why, as you said earlier, Lou, he's got the clear smog there, which is really key, because as soon as you get that in, as long as Torkoal's not taking that wave crash first, then you can be able to get that clear smog off and you're kind of sorted.
That's why I always love Gastrodon, okay? I'm going to talk about him every match of the broadcast. He's here, he's happy to be here, but that's why, when you've got Torkoal, a Pokemon that will fall very vulnerable to something like that wave crash, you could just have your partner Gastrodon and Storm Drain that away, and then Torkoal can clear smog for days. But it's also why, again, speaking of Gastrodon, we saw Clear Smog on it very early on in Series 1 because it had that capability as well to deal with Dondozo. But Torkoal, I mean, I'm not going to write anything off at this point. It's been amazing so far in this Bochum tournament.
Yeah, and in multiple different ways too. In support, as we've seen, and in just go, Trick Room, go, Torkoal, go, fire, go, KO things.
Just do your thing, Torkoal.
Exactly. And for a Pokemon as well that actually doesn't have a hugely high special attack stat either. It's just thanks to the moves it gets and the ability that it's been given as well. It's quite a very unique Pokemon, and it's always good to see it when it comes out in different formats as to how people use it.
Yeah, it's one of those Pokemon that when Trick Room always comes into the fray, it's not only Trick Room teams, but it's also weather teams. And we've seen plenty of weather rules over the years of VGC, and I think particularly considering Pelipper was so dominant in terms of Oceania, and when we came into Series 2 with Palafin, and then, you know, just all the water types that are running around, I think seeing Torkoal actually come back into emergence, not just for the roles that you've mentioned, but also just to control the weather, I think has shown why it has been so popular coming into this tournament.
I completely agree, and I'm sure Álex will probably go much further than just round 3 as well with those wins, I think, too. Just trying to find those people that are not so prepared for the hard Trick Room matchup. So congrats to him and taking that round 3 win. Hope he gets a little bit of a lunch break, and we'll be shortly going into round 4, but not before a little bit of an interview with the man. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Álex Soto, the round 3 interview winner.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the 2023 Bochum Pokemon Regional Championships. My name is Ben Kiriakou, joined here on the couch by the winner of another round 3 game, Álex Soto. And what a commanding victory that you had in that match against a former European international champion, Simone Sanvito. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling so great. I expect that this match was difficult for me because my opponent is a very good player, but I won with my hard Trick Room and I'm feeling so comfortable with that.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about the team that you brought this tournament, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the game, because 2 games set and it looked pretty commanding from yourself. So in game 1, you had a situation with the Indeedee and the Hatterene coming out in the early game, but you chose to switch out that Indeedee early in the game, even though it had that Psychic Seed boost. Talk us through a little bit of your thought process there.
Yeah, I did that because I know that this Among Us, it was in a bad position, instead Hatterene and Indeedee, so I swapped to King Gambit because it has safety googles that protects to Spore and Rage Powder of Among Us, and then in the first turn I had a great position to can sweep with Swords Dance in King Gambit and spam with Dazzling Gleam in Hatterene.
Yeah, that sword stance on the King Gambit made it do so much damage. It's like I saw it go up and I was like, oh, this game is definitely going in Alex's favor. So great way to use your Pokemon to their maximum potential there. And of course in game 2, you just ran away with the game. That turn 1 where you managed to U-turn away into Torkoal, you must have been pretty happy to see that come in without taking any damage.
Yeah. Annihilate have a problem. It's like a roulette because it have a lot of opportunities or a lot of turns that you can do. You can use Final Gambit, you can do Shadow Claw. To my opponent, that's why he used Terra Steel type to avoid the damage of Shadow Claw, and I predict that he probably used Terra type Steel, and I use U-turn because it's a safe move. Then I Terra Fire on Hatterene that was defensive and put the Trick Room. And in this situation, it was so clean for me to use Eruption and Dazzling Gleam and win the game.
Yeah, that Eruption did so much damage. You didn't even need the Terra Fire that you used in game 1. That Arcanine just came in and just got knocked out pretty quickly. Usually a Pokemon that you see sticking around on the field for a few turns, right? But speaking about your team, you used in your preparation for this event, obviously you came as the runner-up in the Liverpool Regional Championships not long ago, but the team looks pretty similar to what you used in Liverpool. Tell us a little bit about your preparation here.
Okay, I like the hard Trick Room teams in this format because I think that it have a lot of potential. Then in Series 2, I try to adapt my Liverpool team with some changes, no much, but some changes to face against Paradox Pokemon like Great Task or Fluttermane. That's why, for example, the difference between my Liverpool's team and my current team, for example, my armor roach is Terra Dark, not Terra Grass, to be more comfortable with White Ward instead Fluttermane, for example, have a better matchup, but the other one, it's exactly the same with different EV spreads, but they are exactly the same, and it seems it currently works.
It's looking good for you so far, because I think the temptation for a lot of players going into Series 2 was to see like, hey, we've got all of these Paradox Pokemon, let's put them on the team and let's see how they go. But you managed to do very well without them. One thing I wanted to ask you about that though, I'd have been tempted to put a Brute Bonnet on the team somewhere, like try to fit it on because of its synergy with Torkoal. So what stopped you from doing something like that?
So, could you repeat that, sorry?
Yeah. Was it not tempting to use Brute Bonnet with the Sun?
Team.
Yeah.
Okay. I tested Brute Bonnet, but I think that King Gambit did better than Brute Bonnet because my team is bad against Arcanine Snarl. Then if you have King Gambit with Defiant, if the opponent Arcanine uses Snarl to you, you boost your attack in 2 levels. And Brute Bonnet can't do that. You know, that's why I was testing Brute Bonnet, but in my opinion, I think King Gambit have Dark type too, and it's better. In my team, it's better.
That's a really interesting way to look at the differences between 2 pretty strong Pokemon in the format. But moving away from the tournaments that we're at the moment, I just wanted to get a bit more of a feeling from you as how you got started in VGC and how you've led up to having such consistent performances in both Liverpool and so far this tournament as well.
Okay. I started in 2016 to play VGC, and I started to playing locals and travel at the world, but in the start I was a very bad player. You know, I didn't do top cut, but playing. At the end, in 2020, I did my first good position in Bochum here right now because I lose a final against one of my friends, that is Guillermo Castilla, and that was a motivation to me to want to win a regional, you know, because I did a second position in Bochum, I did a second position in Liverpool too, and I'm feeling that I need to win one regional, you know, because if not, I'm feeling wrong.
And do you think Bochum is the tournament for you?
I think yes.
Oh, very strong words there from Álex. We're going to go to a short break now, but good luck for the later rounds, Álex, and we'll be coming back to you with another really exciting match in not too long. So everyone stay tuned and we'll catch up with you very soon.